Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to Unstoppable Mindset, wherever you happen to be in the world. We're glad you're here. Today, we get to have a conversation with Kelly Campbell. And I got to tell you a little bit about my history with Kelly. There is a history, isn't that something? Anyway, I last year was beginning to seek out speaking opportunities and discovered Kelly's Consciousness Leaders Speakers Bureau and technology and company that helped speakers find opportunities, and wrote to her. And along the way, learned from her executive assistant that Accessiby had sponsored her podcast in 2022. And of course, Accessiby is the organization behind what we do here. So there was some great synergy, and she agreed to represent us in the speaking world. And also, of course, I had to say, Kelly, you got to come on the podcast. And it only took 6 months to get her on, but here it is. And Kelly, we're really glad you're on Unstoppable Mindset after that story. And thanks very much for being here.
Michael, it is my absolute pleasure. Yeah, synergy is the word. There was so much synergy when we first met. So I'm glad to be working together in lots of different ways.
Yeah, you got to keep that going. It'll be a lot of fun. Well, tell us a little bit about kind of the early Kelly growing up and all that sort of stuff.
Oh, the early Kelly.
I know. Doesn't that make it fun?
Well, listen, none of us had perfect childhoods. Mine was just a little more imperfect than most. And so, the way that I grew up, I grew up with a mother who had basically comorbidity conditions of borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. And I didn't know any of those words when I was a kid, right? And my dad ended up leaving. They kind of got unofficially separated, I guess you call it, when I was about 9. And so he was sort of my protector in the house. And so when he left, it was like my hypervigilance went on overdrive. And I think for many, many years, I would say even decades, it took me a long time to figure out how to get out of that nervous system dysregulation. And again, I didn't have any of these words or any of this understanding for a very long time. So
well, that's usually what happens. Kids know something's going on, but can't really describe it or articulate it.
Yeah. So I knew something was off. I knew I had to protect myself in some ways. And I think I did a pretty good job of that. But what I also, came to understand was the ways in which I was in the world, meaning, in academics or in my social settings, in my athletic career. I was, trying to become this perfect persona, in every single way. And it was really at the heart of it, I didn't understand that there was a disconnect between her ability to love me. I thought it was, if I just did this thing more perfectly, if I just got these straight A's and was captain of all these sports teams and got a full ride to college, and she would be proud and she would love me. And she didn't have the tools to do that. But so I took that to mean that I was unlovable, right? So I know the title of your podcast is Unstoppable Mindset, but I felt unlovable. And so I didn't feel very unstoppable. And so creating, I tried a little dip of the toe in the water of corporate America right after college, and that didn't work for me. Immediately, I created an organization. I started a digital marketing agency that focused on nonprofits and foundations and social impact initiatives. I was an avid conservationist and really was an advocate for the environment and, all the things that we can do ourselves. And so I took all of that passion and all of that and created this agency. And so I had this digital marketing agency for about 14 years. I ended up selling it in 2016. And, that was about 8 years ago. And now I've been a consultant to Facebook and NASA. I have been essentially a trauma-informed leadership coach for the last few years. And I get to work with leaders in all different sectors on really what I did, which was correlating their childhood trauma with their leadership style, the way that they show up in a leadership position today.
Mm-hmm. Well, a question that comes to mind is, okay, so you had the situation that you had as a child, and you worked really hard to be loved. And as you pointed out, your mother didn't have the tools. Well, so before I ask the question I'm really thinking of, did that ever change? Has it ever changed with her, or is it kind of
No,
just no? Yeah.
no, and I write about this in the book, which I know we'll touch upon. She sort of, I'll call it, she opted out of my life when I was about
Okay.
24. And so I have not had any contact with her in 20 years.
Okay. So the question that I really was thinking of is, so all of that happened, but you, I gather, really did excel. You were the captain of teams, you got great grades and so on. So as you look back on it, even though what occurred did happen, do you feel positive, or do you feel that all that was, in a sense, now worth it, now that you can look back on it?
I think everything was worth it. I think, I have a very different mindset about what it was. I think to be really honest, I lived for many years in the state of victimization or victimhood. And, these things happened to me, right? Were imposed upon me. And I think once I started doing the deeper inner work, that mindset started to shift, and it was like, wait a minute, I have agency. I didn't just start an agency. I actually have agency to figure out how I want to live the rest of my life. And this is not it. This is not it.
Yeah. And that's what I was getting to, is that your mindset shifted, and I'm assuming that you no longer feel that you're unlovable.
Oh, not at all.
There you go.
But I will say the difference is that it wasn't just about my mother, right?
Yeah.
It was any external validation or getting that, I am lovable because so-and-so feels this way about me or cares about me or loves me.
Right.
The need for that has fallen away over all of these years of doing this work. And I understand now that I am lovable because I love me. Right. It's the only thing that matters. But it takes people, and it sounds so simple, Michael, but it takes people a very, very long time, most of us until midlife, to figure that out. And some of us don't ever figure it out.
Yeah. Or we figure it out even much later. And it's so unfortunate that we don't have the tools to figure out some of those things a lot earlier. And of course, as a child, as a kid, it's hard to associate that. And so you look to your parents, you look up to your parents, and you talked about what your father did for you and what your mother didn't do for you, but it's taken a long time to really gain the rest of the tools necessary to put a better perspective on all that.
You got it. Yeah. Yeah. And, I do have a close relationship with my father. I would love an even closer relationship with him. He also, and I do write about this in the book, he had his own, tumultuous upbringing with physical abuse from his stepfather. And I'm not sure that he ever really has integrated that or addressed that. And so I think that there's a little bit of, I don't know, just a lack of understanding that there is a closeness that could happen. There's a depth to relationship that could happen if he were to go ahead and break through those things. However, as much as I want that for him, that is not my responsibility as his child. It's really up to him. And that's the thing. It's up to each one of us to determine the way that my life is going, the quality of the relationships that I have are not everything that I think that they could be or that I hope that they could be. And so now I have to look inward and say, where is my contribution to that? And how do I want that to change? How committed am I to helping those changes be brought about?
Yeah. And as I was thinking and going to say, the fact is that the journey continues. And so you're going to even learn more as you go forward, which can only help.
That's right.
It's a matter of looking for it. And most of us don't take a lot of time to be introspective and look at what we do or why we do what we do and how we do it. I'm a strong advocate for people should take time at the end of every day looking at what happened that day. And I never like to view things as a failure. Um, I can view things as, well, this didn't work. So what do I learn from that? Because I have to teach me as to how to deal with it. But the bottom line is that we should really take time to look at what didn't work and what worked and how could we make it even better. And what does that mean for our lives? And we mostly don't do that. Oh, I don't have the time. I've got to get right to sleep because I got to get up in the morning. And we miss such golden opportunities to start to think about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that could come in a variety of different ways, right? The cerebral resources that are available to us through guided meditations and podcasts and books that we might listen to or read. There are so many ways to enter this realm, to just get started, to just, I don't know, really get curious and start to understand that there are all of these resources available to us. And all we have to do is just pull the thread or lean into what feels resonant for us.
Right. Yeah. And then follow through on it.
And then follow through on it, because it's not just about the cerebral, right? We're talking about integrating trauma really at the heart of this. And so you can't think your way out of a feeling that is in your body and literally in your, stuck in sort of your nervous system and your fascia and, in your physical body. So the combination of the cerebral, the mindset work, the mindfulness, and the somatic work, the movement, the emotional release. There are lots and lots of healing modalities, trauma integration modalities available to us. Most people think of therapy and that's it. Mm-hmm. But therapy is one out of literally millions of modalities that are available to us.
Well, the other thing about therapy is people think I'll go to therapy and I'll get all the answers because the therapist will give me the answers. And therapists do help give you answers and coaches help guide you to answers, but still none of those matter if you don't do something about it once you are given opportunities or discover opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are a lot of people who say, yeah, I'm doing the work, quote unquote. I've been in therapy for 15 years, like I was. And, therapy is wonderful, especially if you haven't talked to anyone before about what is going on in your life and what's on your heart and things that are, maybe behaviors that you're not happy with. That's a wonderful thing. Staying in that relationship, though, and continuously just talking about it, sort of in many cases, I won't say all cases because there are lots of therapists who specialize in different things, but in many cases, a lot of people stay stuck in repetitive patterns. Mm-hmm. And if you really, to your point, if you want to make the change, it is about committing and doing things different through other types of modalities. And some of those modalities don't rely on another person, right? Those are things that you're doing yourself. So yeah, there's a lot, and no healing journey looks the same. It's not linear,
Yeah, it isn't for any of us. And you may try something and it doesn't really work or seem to work for you. And so you don't give up. You need to try something else until you find something that works. And you also have to look at what it is you're trying to achieve and what it is that you're trying to accomplish.
That's right. That's right. Because just like anything, you have to set a goal or not even a goal so much as maybe there's some little shift. Maybe the goal is I want to feel less anxious, right? Maybe the goal is I want to feel more comfortable in my skin, in my body. Maybe, so they're not, I think goal is maybe not the best word, but they are things that you are interested in changing, modifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. So what is trauma? It's a word we hear all the time. What really is it?
We hear the word trauma every single day.
Yeah.
Whether we're talking to a friend or scrolling on Instagram or something like that, it has become a pretty, I don't know, just like a word of the year. I think it probably will be the word of the year for 2024. Trauma, it is derived from the Greek word for, which means wound, right? But what we're talking about here is beyond that. We're not talking necessarily about physical wounds, although that could be trauma. We're talking about unintegrated information. So, not the events that have happened to you at some point in your life, whether that's in childhood or older, not the events themselves, but what happens inside your body because of that event or events or prolonged scenario, right? So it could be a one-time event that you experience, but what your body and your mind and your psyche are remembering in your tissues, because it's not memory, it's, think of it like a body sensation, right? Something that is triggered in your nervous system that says this was an unsafe thing, or this was an experience that I do not want to experience again. So now I'm going to be hyper vigilant to make sure that I protect myself from not experiencing that again, right? So I specify that it's not the event, not only because we know that from, experts like Dr. Gabor Mate and Bessel van der Kolk, but we know that if you and I experience the same event, it may not have been traumatic for you and it may have been traumatic for me, right? So there's a subjectivity to this stuff. It's a lot of nuance. But at the end of the day, it's a situation where we have been feeling overwhelmed and unable to cope with a stressor, right? And that stressor, we don't have to determine whether that is big T trauma, small T trauma, because again, there's subjectivity to it. Just an overwhelm and an inability to integrate the information.
So how does trauma intersect or become involved in dealing with leadership? What does it mean in the context of leadership?
Well, I mean, leaders are humans, right? So we can't pretend that once we step into a leadership role, if we put a suit on or, some other expression of leadership, quote unquote, that all of the trauma and all of those experiences and all of the maladaptive behaviors that we have because of it, that they just fall away, right? We can't pretend that happens. That doesn't happen because we're the same person internally, whether we're showing up at work or we're with our family or we are at home. We just wear masks because we don't think that we will be seen as competent if we bring our true selves, our authentic selves, our genuine selves, the real us into those scenarios. So this is a huge passion of mine and has become really my life's work, is this intersection between trauma and leadership, because no one is talking about these things. Mm-hmm. And we are very aware of them. They are in our faces all the time, right? In our political leaders, in our corporate leaders. We see on the news the Elon Musks of the world and all of these other people who clearly we know in some way, shape, or form that there is something off, quote unquote, about them. Really, these are wounded humans, right? Elon Musk has been very vocal about some of the things that he's experienced in childhood, in relationship to his father and some of the abuse that he endured through his peers when he was younger. So there was a feeling of powerlessness. And I just use this example because there are a lot of people who are familiar with him mm-hmm. and the innovation in which he leads. But a lot of people are not familiar with how actually terrible he is as a people leader. And, a lot of that stems from childhood trauma where he felt powerless. He is now projecting that I will never feel that powerless again. I will be the richest and most powerful man in the world. He said that when he was 8 years old, and boy, has that come true.
Yeah. The other side of it, though, is that if he did take a different tact in terms of how he dealt with people, how much, I hate to use the word, but more powerful or more influential he would really be.
Well, I hear that. And I would just build on that to say, how much more positive impact could he make?
Yeah, that's why I changed it from powerful to
Yeah.
influential, because I
Yeah.
think that's more relevant, having a more powerful impact. Well, look at Steve Jobs.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know as much about Steve Jobs. A lot of people were very loyal to him in the company, and he did a lot. And I just keep thinking, if he had lived 10 more years, what would it have been like in the world?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good question.
Yeah, and it's one of those. Well, we're not going to get that answer, so we'll just have to not worry about it, I guess, or we can think about it. But how do we all move forward is really the issue. But a question that I love to ask. We've been talking about leadership a little bit. What is a leader?
That's a great
I
question.
know it's a fun question, and I love to get different answers. And there's not necessarily a real right answer, but it's a fair question.
Yeah, it is a fair question. I love this question. My favorite definition of a leader, and I'll paraphrase this. It's not mine. It's comes from Brene Brown. It's really, someone who sees the potential in other people and has the courage to develop that potential.
Yeah.
It feels to me like, what we thought about or what we understood as leadership over the last 200 years is not what we actually would like to think of as leadership, right? It's not an authoritarian. It's not someone who has all the answers and leads us into battle and, all of that. It is someone who is there to create more leaders, not more followers of them. You are not going to get that answer from a lot of people, but that's what I believe.
Yeah. And I think that the definition is a great one, um, and would that more people would see it, because bosses are not by any definition necessarily leaders at all.
Not at all. Not at all. They're just wounded children in a way, if you think about it, right? I mean, think about trauma, what its impact is. You asked me before, what is its impact on leadership? If we have a traumatic experience, right? We experience trauma at, let's say, 9 years old. We are ultimately stunted at 9 years old if we don't integrate that experience. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of 9-year-olds running companies. I was one of them, which is why I can say that. The day the introduction of the book is this woman had asked me, it was a consultant that I had hired, and she said, I want you to close your eyes, and what was the first moment that you remember stepping into a leadership role? And the introduction of the book became, or was born out of the answer to that question. And the answer was, I literally thought of the day that I was 9 years old, sitting in the back seat of my family car, a Crown Victoria. I'll never forget it. And my brother, who's about a year younger than me, was sitting next to me. And my mother was taking us to the movie theater. But before we went into the movie theater, she turned around and said, "Oh, I just want to let you kids know your father's not going to be living with us anymore." And this was the moment that I remembered when this woman asked me, what was the first moment you remember stepping into a leadership role? Because as blown out as I was by this news and scared and confused and had all these questions and no support, I, in that moment, turned to my brother, right, and put my hand on his back. And for me, it was supporting him and comforting him and sort of letting him know that he was not alone in this, right? And it's a weird memory to come up for that kind of question. But for a long time, prior to me doing any of this healing work and trauma integration work on myself, I was that 9-year-old kid running that company. Mm-hmm. So, to me, it's like, do we want more 9-year-olds running companies, or do we want centered, fully embodied, actively healing humans running companies and organizations?
Yeah. And you've evolved from being that 9-year-old child along the way, which is, of course, a great thing.
Yeah.
Which is what you needed to do.
Yeah. It's taken a lot of work. And that's the thing. This is a lifelong commitment, right? This isn't a single ayahuasca retreat or just therapy for a few years. That's not what this is about. This is a lifelong commitment to, really understanding who you are, what behaviors you would like to change, how you want to show up in the world, how you want to lead in whatever way that means, whether that's in your family system, at work, in your social group, maybe you have a religious affiliation. Leadership comes in all different flavors and sizes, right? But it's figuring that out and then understanding as part of that healing journey and that process, what you are here to contribute in the world, because this isn't about you, right? The more you learn about yourself, the less your ego is online, which is kind of a interesting oxymoron there. But it's more about what is your purpose? What are you here to contribute in the world? Because you understand through the healing journey that this is so much bigger than you, so much bigger.
So following up on that and kind of continuing, and since healing is a lifelong commitment, what's in it for leaders?
Well,
since we always seem to want to do things that way. So what's in it for me? What's in it for leaders?
What's in it for me?
Yeah.
Well, I will answer the question, but my initial reaction as a trauma-informed leadership coach is think about, if there's a leader who has that sort of that question, right? They're sort of being provocative. Well, what's in it for me? Why should I do any of this healing stuff? It sounds terrible. It takes a lifetime. It has nothing to do with my legacy. Well, my question to that person would be, well, think about what your life is like right now. And if we were to fast forward 5 years from now, and life is exactly the same way, you're feeling the level of overwhelm, anxiety, you're biting at people that you don't even know. Maybe there's like some anger going on in your body. You tend to micromanage people. Your relationships aren't exactly what you would love them to be. If we fast forwarded 5 years from now and life was exactly like that, would you be okay with that? Right? And really, when we're getting real, is this current thing called life working for you as is?
Yeah.
That would be my question. But I like to stoke the fire a little bit. But what's in it for people is some of the things that I alluded to. Better, closer, deeper, more meaningful relationships, not just at work, not just at home, not just with friends. I'm talking about all of them, because you will show up differently, right? If you own an organization or are in leadership of an organization, a workplace, the bottom line will actually see the impact of this in a positive way, because the people who you are leading will trust you more, will respect you more, will be more loyal. So you'll have less employee attrition, maybe even less client attrition or customer attrition, right? People want to follow and emulate those who have, aligned values. I mean, Accessibility is a great example of that, right? So there's so much in it, and it's not just about the business or just about the personal, it's everything. You're also probably going to find that you develop a passion or reignite or rekindle a passion for some of the things that you were really excited about when you were a kid. Maybe you loved nature. Maybe you loved to play an instrument. Whatever the thing was, there's more joy and more passion and more fulfillment in your life by doing this work. So I don't know, that sounds like no big deal to me. It's just life-changing. There's so much available to us, and it's only possible once we do this work.
Well, while I was in college, I did radio and loved it. I was in radio on the campus for 6.5 years and had a lot of fun doing it, and never thought I'd be back doing something is been part of my life relating to that. And 4 years ago, I would never have thought of being the host of a podcast. But in 2021, when I joined Accessibility, they asked if I would do it, and here we are. And it's really doing very well. A lot of people seem to really like it, and we're having a lot of fun. And for me personally, excuse me, I get to learn a lot And I think that's the most important thing for me is I get to learn a lot. I've changed my mindset on things over the past 2.5 years. And as I tell people, whenever we do these podcasts, there's only one hard and fast rule, and that is we both have to have fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're doing that. I'm glad that you brought that up, because this idea of being a lifelong learner and being curious about the world, that's a little throwback to what I was talking about in childhood, right? If you look at a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 9-year-old, they're, everything is in awe. Everything is wondrous, right?
Yeah.
There's so much exploration and experimentation. And then we are taught little by little, inadvertently, and then sometimes very explicitly,
Yeah.
that is not something that we can continue with, right? We might be able to do it for a few years when we're toddlers, but like now you've got to get serious. There's people who ask, 5-year-olds, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right? It's like, I don't have to make that decision. I just want to be a kid right now. So, yeah, it's just like that level of curiosity and being a lifelong learner, being able to change your mindset as opposed to having a fixed mindset and thinking very narrowly or thinking from a binary perspective. That to me is one of the greatest gifts of healing as a leader.
And we really shouldn't be discouraged from being curious. And it happens so often. I know I've been to museums and other places where I'll reach out and touch something that we're passing, and somebody say, you can't touch that. You can't do this. You can't do that. Why not? The reality is I can appreciate not everyone going to a museum should be allowed to touch art, because too many hands with oil can have an effect on it. But allowing a blind person who's not going to see it any other way to touch it shouldn't be a problem. And allowing other people to be curious in their own way shouldn't be a problem. But it's all too often something we discourage as people grow older. When you get, as you point out of being a toddler, you're starting to be taught not to be curious. I've seen so many examples where I've been somewhere and somebody wants to either pet my dog or ask me a question about being blind, a child, and their parents, oh, don't do that. That's impolite. It's not,
And do you say that?
I try to, well, whenever I can.
Yeah.
And like one of my philosophies and one of my policies is if a child wants to pet my guide dog, and I hear the child ask and the parent uses, oh no, that dog might bite and so on, I will stop. I'll take the harness off, because that's Alamo's cue that he's no longer working. And I will say, go ahead. You can pet the dog. He's very friendly. I just hope you're not holding an ice cream cone, but I will always do that. And with adults, mostly the same thing. If an adult wants to pet the dog, if I have time, I will again stop and take the harness off, and I'll say, I'm taking the harness off because now he knows he's not working. And there have been a few times that someone has wanted to pet the dog, and I've said, look, I've got to go. I don't have the time right now. I would love to, but I just don't have the time. And they pet the dog anyway. And of course, I know that because the dog turns and looks and wants to visit more, because dogs love that. Right. And I have to give the dog a correction because they shouldn't be responding to the person. And the correction is just a slight tug on the leash. And I remember one case where a woman did it and she said, oh, don't punish the dog. I was the one that was petting the dog. And I said, no, you don't understand. The dog shouldn't have reacted. I'm going to deal with the dog and then I'll deal with you, because I had already said, no, I don't have time. But with children, I
was just going to say, she was not respecting your boundaries or the dog's boundaries in that case.
Right. Yeah. With children, I'll always stop, because I don't want them to be afraid. And I want to give them the opportunity to ask questions. And I realize, well, I have a teaching mentality anyway, and I believe that my job is whenever I can to teach. And I love to do it with adults too. It's so much fun.
Yeah. I want to go back to the boundary thing for a moment, because it just sparked something in me. Part of doing healing work is not taking things so personally, so that when someone does, enact a boundary, you respect it, and you respect it genuinely, right? Yeah. And then you also, on the flip side of that, have the ability to not sort of fall into that people-pleasing tendency, and you can more easily, state what your boundaries are in a very, loving and respectful way.
Yeah.
And so I think that respecting people's boundaries and then being able to talk about your own and express your own, that's another benefit. As we're talking, it's like we could have a whole podcast just talking about benefits of healing.
Yeah. Maybe we should. But yeah, there's a lot to be said for boundaries. And I fear in our society, we're losing the concept of boundaries, that there are so many things that are happening. We talk about politicians and others and so on who seem not to have any respect for boundaries. And we're losing the art of conversation. People won't talk or allow themselves to be involved in talking about them and being involved in such discussions.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a shame,
Yeah.
Boundaries are really important. Boundaries are kind. I love boundaries. Boundaries also help with conversations about consent, right? I mean, all of these things are intertwined. And so the more that we heal, the more that we understand what we're comfortable with, what we will accept from the people in our lives, the things that we will not accept. And then we understand, we grow and we learn new language around that. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful.
Now, my cat doesn't have any respect for boundaries.
Well, we can't help the cats.
But my dog does. He really clearly respects boundaries, and I would hope that I understand his. But we have a great synergistic relationship. In reality, I do with the cat as well. But she's a fun kitty. She's 14 and a rescue cat and a lot of fun. So it works well. But boundaries are something that we're just losing the art of understanding. People say we shouldn't talk about politics and all that. And I keep thinking, why not? Why don't we have enough boundaries and enough respect for others that we can't discuss things where maybe we disagree? There's nothing wrong with disagreement. We should be able to discuss it. Good teams learn to disagree. And the point of a good relationship in a team is that team members can very well disagree, and they know that their views will be respected by the other members of the team, so they can do it. But in general, we just don't see that.
But that comes from the top, right? So if there's discourse, that means that there's trust.
Yeah.
If trust is not at the top, meaning we looking up at the leader, if that trust is not there, then we are not going to feel on the team the ability to trust one another. So it's very much like a modeling, right? And so leaders who are vulnerable, leaders who say, I don't have all the answers. I actually need your help to run this organization or finish this project or whatever it is. And then you mentioned team in the case of maybe personal relationships. A team could be just two partners. A team could be a family, right? And so, it all of this transcends and is so interconnected between all of these types of relationships. But I think trust and discourse, right, and not avoiding conflict. You can't have any of those things, which are beautiful things, to understand someone else's perspective and give them the space to express their perspective and be able to say, you know what? I can hear what you're saying, and I still have my beliefs. The purpose of this discourse is not to necessarily change each other's mind or to be on the same page, but it's just to understand a little bit more about, underlyingly, what are your values? What are my values? And I think that, part of this is we get so rigid and so tight when we haven't addressed what's underneath all of this, So I love being able to have conversations about politics or, with the people. And this is where you have to be discerning. It's with the people who can hold that both and thinking, and aren't such on a binary track. So you have to be discerning about that, because you want to keep, put yourself in situations where you also feel a sense of safety.
Yeah. But the other part about team relationships, say within a corporation, is the ultimate goal of discussions and controversy or disagreement is to eventually come to some sort of consensus. It doesn't necessarily mean that one or either of us like the decision, but we come to a decision that we can live with until or unless it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And then if it doesn't work, then we say, okay, it's nobody's fault. We decided, we all did it together. Let's figure out where we go from here. And one of my favorite books is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. I don't know if you've never read that. It's a great book.
I have not, but I will.
It's a fairly short book, but it's a great book that talks about teamwork. And the basic premise is, as you point out, trust. One of the things that I love to tell people is that I have learned a lot more about teamwork and team development and trust from working with 8 guide dogs than I've ever learned from all the experts in the world on it. Because when I'm working with a guide dog, and make no mistake, it is an absolute teaming relationship. When I work with a guide dog, we are truly developing a team. We each have a job to do. And part of my job is supposed to be the team leader, but also as the team leader, and this is something I was going to bring up, a leader needs to know when to give up leadership to somebody else on the team because they may be able to handle a particular situation well and better than you. And you sort of alluded to that. And that's true with a guide dog. If we're walking down a sidewalk and we get to a curb, the dog stops because the job of the guide dog is to make sure that I walk safely, not to know where to go and how to get there. That's my job. And the dog trusts me to know that. And if I convey that I don't know that, the dog's going to get worried. So it makes me feel more obligated in advance whenever we're going to be somewhere to learn how to go where I need to go. Now, I can still get lost, but I know that when that happens and I get confused, I can't panic because that's going to make the dog uncomfortable. But as I was going to say, when we get to a street corner and the dog stops and then I say forward and we start across the street and suddenly the dog jerks back, I'm not going to question what that dog is doing. I'm going to follow that dog. Right. Partly it's a survival thing, but also partly that's the dog's job. And what it usually is a hybrid vehicle is coming that I didn't hear.
Right.
So the dog will go back and I'm going to follow that dog and I'm going to tell that dog what a great job it was doing. Yeah. Likewise, going down the stairs at the World Trade Center, it was the same sort of thing. I needed to keep the dog confident and focused. So it was ongoing constant praise, which was also sending a message to the dog, I'm okay. And it didn't matter what I was thinking inside. That's what I needed to do to help my teammate be able to function well.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story. I know you've shared it many times, but I just hearing it and kind of in this little conversation, I appreciate it. And it really speaks to that relationship, that trust, and also the fact that as a leader, you will not always have the right answer or know what to do next, right?
Right.
There's something, since we're on the theme of dogs and cats, and there is something that I put into the prologue of the book related to geese, Canada geese. And the reason why I did that was because my grandmother loved more than anyone I've ever known, loved Canada geese specifically because they fly in a V formation. Mm-hmm. And the reason behind the flying in a V formation. So many people don't know this, but when they fly in a V formation, the leader, quote unquote, who is at the top of the V,
of the
V, right? That is the most rested goose, right? So the one who has essentially moved all the way to the back, has rested for the longest period of time, then flies past every one of the other ones and takes the leadership position. And they do that because they are the most rested. And what I love about that is if we started thinking about trusting the leader who is the most rested, right? That the relationship between trust and rest, if that was part of the way that we think about leadership, boy, would that be a different we would live in, right? So it speaks to like regenerative leadership and trusting someone who is maybe in a better physical scenario than you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating how we've gone so off course with what we think of as a leader or a good leader versus what the definition should really be.
I wonder how it is that the geese know who the most rested is.
Well, just based on where they are in the formation, so the one at the very back has fallen back from the leadership position that they were in at one point.
And they
And
all sense it.
every time a new one comes to the front, they basically take the next position back, right? And so
Yeah.
they're by the time they get to the very tail of the V formation, that's the one who has benefited from that aerodynamic,
Right.
situation.
And they track it. So they know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the point. So did your grandmother ever get to visit with any of the Canadian geese?
My grandmother, she loved Canada geese so much that she actually had requested that we had a flock of geese in a V formation engraved on her headstone. I mean, that's how much she loved them. And for me, it was more about this idea of innate leadership that I sort of digested from her, or I don't know, maybe it was through osmosis, because she was like the matriarch of our family and was not the one that was the most vocal, was not the one that didn't ask for help. She led in a way that really was real and human and vulnerable and just beautiful. She created a lot of trust within our family for each of the grandchildren. I kind of joke around that she made each and every one of us feel like we were her favorite. So yeah, I have such fond memories of that. So that's why I started the book with that.
When we moved to Northern California back in 2002, there was a flock of ducks. Well, before we moved in, there was a contractor who did work to make the house wheelchair accessible for my wife. And he warned us that there were ducks. And he said he made the mistake of giving a piece of a donut to one of them. And he said every day they would come up to the door. And if I didn't have donuts for them, they'd go for the throat. So we got to visit with the ducks. And then one day I was out feeding the ducks, and we bought what I call duck bread. We bought white bread from Costco, and they loved it. And I was out feeding the ducks one day, sitting on our back patio, and this bigger beak came into the mix. And I called Karen, who came on and said, it's a goose. And it was an American gray lag goose who had been living in that community for a while. I don't know whether he thought he was a duck, but he and the ducks got along, and he loved to come up and get fed as well and liked to get petted. It was, I knew that goose generally were a little bit touchy about that, but not Silver. He loved it.
That's great. I love it. I love it. You have so much nature in your life.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And eventually he died. He was like 18 when we knew him. And
oh, wow.
I don't know how much longer he lived, but one day he wasn't there anymore. Yeah. So what are some self-care strategies that leaders can use when you're trying to deal with this long-term commitment to heal?
Well, I think you're illustrating one really nicely in some of these stories, which is connection to nature, right? Getting out in nature. If you have pets, sometimes self-care looks like going for a walk with your dog or petting your cat, even taking care of your plants, right? I know these things sound really simple, but I think a lot of people think about self-care as only, maybe going to the gym or getting a massage, or some people think about self-care as having a glass of wine after work. Those things, in many ways, sort of, you can think about them like superficial self-care. And that's sort of a bifurcation that I make in the book. Mm-hmm. When we're talking about really integrating trauma, we're doing deep, pretty profound work where there can be emotions that come up: anger, sadness, grief, rage, things that we didn't maybe express when we were younger. There's a lot to deal with.
Yeah.
So real self-care strategies is, maybe things like enacting boundaries. If you've got friends that want to go out and you feel like you just don't have the capacity for that, maybe it's saying, thank you for the invitation. I'm actually going to take care of myself tonight. I'm going to prioritize my mental well-being or my physical well-being. So it's resting for sure. It's probably at the top of my list, is getting more rest, because so many of us do not get rest. Sure, we might sleep at night for a few hours or even 6, 7, 8 hours, but that's sleep. Rest is a little different. So rest could be like taking naps or things like that. Prioritizing ourselves in terms of those boundaries. I mean, there are so many different things that you can employ, but they have to feel good for you, right? And again, really thinking about this distinction between what is superficial, right, and what is actual self-care, right?
Yeah.
Taking time for yourself. Maybe if you're, I don't know, doing some project, maybe building in some rest periods so that you're not just grinding through it. We're in such a hustle culture, and we normalize that. And we think that it's a positive thing because we're getting rewarded by that. We get rewarded with promotions and all these other things. When we overwork, when we get overstimulated, we get bonuses and promotions for it. But at what cost, right? Yeah. So taking care of ourselves is more about, just having an awareness of, what do I actually need? What capacity do I actually have to get this thing done or to say yes to this? Is this something that I should be saying no to? So it's more of that in that realm. And of course, there are, probably dozens of other things that we can kind of put into the real self-care bucket. But I think it's in that realm, and I would put rest at the top.
Where should leaders, I think we've touched on this, but actually begin if they want to start down this path of healing?
There are a lot of places to start. I mean, again, if you've never, spoken with anyone before, I think therapy is a wonderful place to start. It may not be the thing that will get you to trauma integration, but it's a great mental health maintenance protocol. And it's a great entryway into healing. If you want to learn a little bit more about where you're sitting on the spectrum of, being a conscious leader, like high conscious leader, low conscious leader, evolving leader, and what all of that kind of means, I do have a leadership quiz. So it's essentially answering 20 different I statements and seeing how true those feel to you. Though that quiz is on my website, it's free. If you want to get the full report, quote unquote, or the full assessment, you would just have to put your email address in at the end. But that's at klcampbell.com/leadership.
Cool. Well, we'll have to go check out the quiz. Now I'm curious, which is fair. Well, you talked earlier about people pleasing, and I realize that can be a real problem and a real challenge. Oh, I've got to just do this because I don't want to make anyone unhappy. And that, again, that's not dealing with boundaries very well, including your own. So what are some things that people can do to stop just being a people-pleasing leader or a people pleaser?
Well, it's not going to come by just stopping it, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not going to come from a mental shift of, I'm going to stop doing this. It really, you have to understand and start doing work on the underlying causes and conditions as to why you are in that people-pleasing mode. And most of the time it comes from us not feeling like we're worthy or we're valuable unless we say yes to these things. Or, God forbid if we, create conflict, or if we say no or we push back on something, this person may not like me. I may not get this promotion, right? So there's all these stories that get created. Yeah. So I think it's about really going under the hood and figuring out, where does that come from? So sort of unpacking that for yourself, and then deciding, okay, I want to have more control over my schedule. I want to have more control over my life. I want to pursue the things that I want to pursue. And in order to do that, I've got to say no to certain things. So yeah, it's really about doing a little bit of self-exploration,
Mm-hmm.
determining what you want to change in those realms, and then doing some of the work on yourself. And it's through that work that you get to the point where you're like, you know what? I am worthy and valuable and all of that simply for who I am. I don't need to prove that by saying yes to all of these things, by taking on all of this responsibility that I actually don't have capacity for. So it's a much longer answer than you may have
Yeah.
looking for, but that's the reality of it. It's not just I'm not going to people please anymore. So, because the reality is you could give people tools and tactics all day long, but if you're not addressing or they're not addressing the underlying causes, it's just not going to be effective.
Actually, it more was like the answer I was looking for, because I know it's not a simple thing to do.
Okay,
But
fair.
yeah, but at work, there are a lot of people who keep saying, you're not doing enough. You didn't do this. You got to do that. How do you push back on that if you're at work or in any part of your life to say, wait a minute, I'm really doing the best that I can, and get people to accept that?
Well, this is about boundaries, right? And the
Yeah.
thing is, at the end of the day, you cannot control what other people think about you or how they talk about you or what their perception is. You have to be really comfortable with your own decisions
Yeah.
and setting those boundaries from a place, as I said before, of like compassion and kindness and just, being loving. But what you're doing is you're being loving to yourself at the same time that you're actually being loving to them. They may not interpret it that way. They may not receive it that way. But the more you take care of you, the more you can actually give in other realms. So how do you do it? And, if people are pushing back, there are lots of ways to be able to get them to see, this is what I've done. This is what I'm able to do. Right. So we'll give a concrete example. You're at work, your boss asks you to take on this project that you have absolutely no capacity for. So you could say something like, I'm happy to help with that project. I have this other project that you've given me that I'm fully dedicated to. Which one takes priority? Because I can't do both. So which one would you like me to work on starting today and potentially push off? So we're going to have to talk about the time frame in which those things are completed, right? So it's more of a conversation. It's more of a collaborative, as opposed to just saying yes and then not letting anyone know that you're working until 1 o'clock in the morning, not getting enough sleep. It's impacting your health, et cetera, et cetera. You know where this goes.
Yeah.
I would say the majority of people function like that. And I would say that function is probably not what they're doing.
Yeah. And they're totally missing the opportunity to be better performers. And if the people they're working with won't develop some respect for that, then they're contributing to a lack of productivity.
You got it.
Yeah. I remember one of my first jobs was not in sales, but I was called into the office of the VP of marketing one day and said, we're laying you off. And I said, why? And he said, well, you've done a great job of things that you were doing, but we've hired too many non-revenue producing people and we have to change that. So we're laying you off. And then he paused. He said, unless you're willing to go into sales. And we don't want you to sell the product that you were working with, which was mainly a reading machine for blind people, but rather the commercial version of it. And my immediate response was, I don't know anything about sales. I've never sold professionally. And his response was, we'll make sure you get all the tools you need. We're going to send you to a Dale Carnegie sales course and so on. And as he talked, I realized they're asking me to do a really significant thing, and he's giving me an opportunity to stay. Why would I refuse? And I've been in sales ever since. Of course, what I realized later is every one of us is always in sales one way or another, but I can trace being in the World Trade Center back to that choice, actually, of being in sales a long time ago. But and I think a lot of us, if we really think about it, can trace where we are back to choices that we've made. And that's a valuable lesson to give us an opportunity to learn from.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And seeing it for that, seeing it as those choice points and those opportunities that we could have taken one path and we took a different path. And just knowing that that was probably what we were meant to do.
So tell us about the book. It's not that we haven't been talking about it, but tell us about the book.
I've been talking about it a little bit here and there. So the book is really a wake-up call. We as a society and as leaders can't keep going the way that we're going. And so, between the mental health stigma and the idea that we cannot talk about our humanity and our trauma at work, and I don't mean trauma dumping, I just mean who we are and how our past has impacted our present. Many people really wouldn't touch this stuff and won't touch this stuff and haven't touched this stuff with a 10-foot pole because we're so afraid to face the truth of who we are, or we're afraid of what we might find out. And I think that we're at a choice point. We're at a critical impasse here, where if we don't start waking up and we don't start taking responsibility for ourselves, our reactions, our behaviors, all of that, remedying our disconnection from this planet that we live on, right? Understanding what we're here to contribute in the world, and not thinking that life is some individualistic journey, right? Because that's not what it's about. Really, this book is a wake-up call for leaders to say, you know what? There has to be a better way to be in the world. And I think I have to go inward, and here are the ways in which I'm going to do that. I do share a number of very personal, vulnerable stories just to kind of model that vulnerability and give you a sense of like what that trauma looked like for me as a leader, or how the impact of trauma impacted me as a leader. And all of it is framed around this idea of, if we are going to move forward in a direction where everyone feels seen, heard, valued, respected, appreciated, etc., safe. We want to live in a world that is inclusive and equitable and reveres nature for what it is. Then I frame this as the 4 fundamentals of what we call high conscious leadership. And so trauma integration is the first fundamental. And then we have embodying vulnerability, and then leading with compassion. And the 4th one is lighting the way, which is really, again, much something I mentioned earlier. Leading the way is about creating more leaders, not more followers. So that's a little bit of an encapsulation of what Heal to Lead is. So it's Heal to Lead, revolutionizing leadership through trauma healing.
And when will the book be out?
The book will be out April 16th.
Cool. Well, anxious to get it. Do you know if there'll be an audio version?
I don't know yet. I have a sneaking suspicion that there will be, but not initially. So initially it'll just be digital and Kindle and hardcover. Eventually, I'm assuming that there'll be an Audible version and probably a paperback at some point in the future.
Yeah, usually the hardcover eventually goes to paperback. If it sells at all, and it will, then that usually does happen. Well, even the Kindle version, we'll have to try to hunt it down. I'm working on a new book that will be out later this year. It's called Live Like a Guide Dog, and it's all about learning to control fear. And what it's not is saying, don't be afraid. It is saying instead, you can learn that fear doesn't need to overwhelm you. So that's going to be out in August. That'll be.
I love that. Congratulations on that.
And I just learned last week that it, and I kind of insisted on it, needless to say, since there are a bunch of us who are blind who are going to want to read it, there will be an audio version of it. So we pushed that with the publishers. That's cool.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm very excited about that for you.
Well, I want to thank you for being here. If people want to reach out to you, how do they do that?
My website is probably the best way. You can find the book. You can find more about what I do. It's just klcampbell.com.
Cool. And they can go off and take the leadership quiz as well.
The leadership quiz is right there. Yeah.
Well, thanks for being here. And I want to thank all of you, wherever you are, for listening today. Please give us a 5-star rating wherever you're listening. Love those 5-star ratings. But we also love just getting your opinions and your thoughts. So please contribute. If you know anyone who ought to be a guest on Unstoppable Mindset, Kelly, you as well, please let us know. And we're always looking for people to have on to give us insights. Me being prejudiced, I get to learn a lot that way. So we love to do it. if you'd like to reach out to me, feel free. You can reach me at Michael, Michaelhi, at Accessibe, ACCESSIBE.com, or go to our podcast page, www.michaelhingson.com/podcast. And Michael Hingson is MICHAELHINGSON. So go there. Love to get your thoughts and again, your ratings. We appreciate it. If you're looking for a speaker, I am always available. Please reach out to me. Another way you can even do that is to email me at speaker@michaelhingson.com. And I would love to chat with you about that. So once more, Kelly, we really appreciate you taking the time to be here. And now it's getting to be lunchtime for you.
Thank you so much, Michael. The pleasure was all mine.